Picture this. The most important courtroom in the galaxy, a massive dome-shaped chamber that could fit 3 football stadiums inside it. The walls are made of some kind of shimmering metal that changes colors based on the mood of the room, and right now, it's pulsing an angry red. 57 different species are packed into those curved seats, and let me tell you, it's quite a sight. You got the insect-like Crothery clicking their mandibles in agitation, the floating gas cloud beings called ethereals swirling in tight, anxious spirals, and the massive rock creatures known as Stoneweavers rumbling so low you can feel in your chest. But every single one of them is focused on the same thing, a small group of beings sitting in what basically amounts to the defendant's box, the Zephyrians. If you've never seen a Zephyrian before, imagine someone carved a person out of the most beautiful crystal you've ever seen, then gave it life. Their skin literally sparkles with internal light, and when they're healthy, they look like living gemstones. Right now, though, these particular Zephyrians look dull, faded, like someone dimmed their inner light way down. At the center of this whole mess stands Ambassador Mills of the Vortak Empire, and this guy is putting on quite a show. The Vortak look kind of like what would happen if a snake decided to grow arms and legs and wear fancy robes. Mills is holding up a data pad, waving it around like it's some kind of holy scripture, his forked tongue flicking out as he speaks in that hissing accent they all have. "Honored council members," Mills declares, his voice carrying that smug tone that makes you want to punch something. The evidence before us is absolutely undeniable. These creatures have violated the most sacred laws of our galaxy. He starts listing off the crimes like he's reading a grocery list. Genetic tampering. Apparently the Zephyrians were messing around with DNA in ways that made everyone uncomfortable. Illegal terraforming. They were changing planets without proper permits, which is apparently a huge no-no in galactic law. Desecrating sacred burial sites. This one really got the religious species fired up, especially the devotees of the ancient light, who consider disturbing any burial ground to be basically the worst thing you can do. The list goes on and on. Environmental destruction, unauthorized scientific experiments, violating quarantine zones. Each accusation makes the chamber's walls pulse a deeper red, and you can practically taste the anger in the air. Some of the smaller species are literally shaking with rage, while the bigger ones are making those deep, threatening sounds that mean business in any language. Then comes the voting. This isn't some quick show of hands. This is formal galactic democracy in action. Each species gets called by name, and their ambassador has to stand up and formally declare their vote. The Crothery Collective votes yes for complete embargo. The Ethereal Union votes yes. The Stoneweaver Confederation votes yes. One after another. Like dominoes falling, every single species votes to cut off the Zephyrians completely. No trade routes. No diplomatic contact. No humanitarian aid. Nothing. It's basically a death sentence for a species whose home planet is already struggling to support life. The chamber keeps getting louder with each yes vote. Some species are cheering. Others are making their version of approving sounds. The Zephyrians themselves just sit there, not moving, not speaking. They know what's coming. Their crystalline faces don't show emotion the same way human faces do, but you can see the light inside them dimming even more with each vote. Then the council president, an ancient turtle-like being whose name sounds like rocks grinding together, calls out, "The Terran Federation." That's when everything changes. Ambassador Kate Brooks. And let me tell you about Kate, because she's exactly the kind of person you want representing humanity in a room full of aliens who could probably eat you for breakfast. She's maybe 50 years old, with gray streaks in her brown hair that she's never bothered to hide, and she wears these simple black suits that somehow make her look more professional than all the fancy robes and ceremonial armor around her. Kate stands up slowly, and I mean slowly. She's not in any hurry. The entire chamber, which had been buzzing with excitement and righteous anger, goes dead silent. You could literally hear someone breathing from across the room. She looks around once, making eye contact with representatives from different species, then speaks in that calm, clear voice that has negotiated treaties and ended wars. The Terran Federation votes no. The reaction is immediate and explosive. The chamber's walls flash from red to white-hot yellow as aliens start screeching, hissing, roaring, and making whatever sound their species makes when they're absolutely shocked. The insect-like Crothery are clicking so fast it sounds like machine gun fire. The ethereals are swirling around like tiny tornadoes. Even the usually calm stone weavers are rumbling loud enough to shake the floor. Some of them are demanding explanations. Others are asking if the translator got it wrong, and a few are suggesting that maybe humanity didn't understand question. But Kate Brooks just calmly gathers up her papers, puts them in her briefcase, and walks toward the exit. No explanations, no justifications, no dramatic speeches. She just leaves behind a room full of aliens who can't believe that someone just offended what they all considered completely indefensible. Fast forward a few weeks, and here's what nobody expected. Human cargo ships start showing up at Zephyrian stations. But let me paint you a picture of what those stations looked like when the first human vessels arrived, because it's heartbreaking and important. The main orbital station above Zephyrian Prime used to be a beautiful thing, like someone had built a city out of living crystal that caught starlight and turned it into rainbows. Now it looked like a dying patient on life support. Half the lights were out, sections of the station were completely dark, and the few docking bays that were still operational had these desperate-looking Zephyrian workers who were so thin you could see their bones through their crystal skin. When Captain Tom Rodriguez brought his ship, the Perseverance, into dock, the Zephyrian Port Authority could barely manage to send someone to greet them. The guy who showed up was wearing what used to be an official uniform, but now it hung off him like a tent. His translator device was old and crackling, and he kept apologizing for the inconvenience of their dying civilization. Tom's a practical guy, you know? He's been running cargo ships for 20 years, seen the good and bad sides of the galaxy, and he's got this way of cutting through nonsense. He's wearing his lucky jacket, this beat-up brown leather thing his dad gave him, and he just looks at this apologetic alien and says, "Where do you want us to unload the supplies?" The Zephyrian port worker stares at him for a long moment, then checks his scanner like maybe he misheard. Supplies? Medical equipment, food processors, atmospheric scrubbers, water purification systems, emergency power generators. Tom lists off, counting on his fingers. We've got 12 more ships coming behind us with more stuff. Where do you want it? You should have seen the look on that worker's face. In Zephyrian body language. When they're shocked, their internal light flickers like a broken bulb. This guy was practically strobing. Now here's the thing about the Perseverance and ships like her. They're not military vessels. They're not fancy diplomatic cruisers. They're working ships with regular people doing extraordinary things. Tom's crew includes Jenny Walsh, who used to be a paramedic before she took up space trucking, and Bobby Chin, an engineer who can fix literally anything with enough coffee and the right tools. These are just ordinary humans who looked at the situation and decided to do something about it. When they started unloading, more Zephyrians began showing up. Word spreads fast in the dying station, and soon there were dozens of them watching in amazement as humans hauled out crate after crate of life-saving equipment. No conditions, no demands, no paperwork. Just, here, you need this more than we do. That's when Elder Vex showed up. Now, Elder Vex used to be part of the Zephyrian High Council, back when they had a functioning government. He's old even by Zephyrian standards, and his crystal skin has this ancient, weathered look that somehow makes you think of wise old trees. But right now, he looks terrible. The internal light that should make him sparkle like a living gem is barely a dim glow, and he moves like every step hurts. He approaches Tom through the crowd of workers and volunteers, and you can tell this is costing him everything just to stay upright. The translator around his neck is even older than the port workers, and it takes a few tries before it starts working properly. Captain Rodriguez, he says, and his voice has this tired, defeated quality that just breaks your heart. I must ask you something that has been troubling me greatly. Why would your people risk everything for us? Your ambassador voted against the entire galaxy. Your ships are here despite the embargo. You could lose your trade routes, your diplomatic relationships, everything your species has built. Why would you risk all of that for us? Tom stops what he's doing. He's been helping unload a medical scanner that weighs about as much as a small car, and looks at this ancient, dying alien who's asking probably the most important question of his life. Tom shrugs, adjusts his worn jacket, and gives him an answer that cuts right to heart of what makes humanity special. Because when we were young and stupid and nearly nuked ourselves into extinction, nobody helped us either. We figured it out. Maybe you will too. But it's what happens next that really gets you. Elder Vec's compound eyes, these complex, multifaceted organs that can see colors humans can't even imagine, start shimmering. It's subtle at first, just a little extra sparkle, but then you realize he's crying. That's how Zephyrians cry, apparently. Their eyes literally sparkle with tears that catch light like tiny diamonds. He's watching human volunteers, regular people who took vacation time from their regular jobs, setting up field hospitals in the ruins of what used to be the most beautiful capital city in this part of the galaxy. Jenny's teaching Zephyrian medical staff how to use human diagnostic equipment. Bobby's working with her engineers to get power restored to critical systems. Others are distributing food packets and showing families how to use the water purification tablets. No speeches about democracy or freedom. No demand for payment or political changes. Just humans being human, helping because it's the right thing to do. The elder stands there, tears sparkling in his ancient eyes, watching hope return to his people for the first time in months. And all because some stubborn humans refuse to give up on them. Here's where it gets interesting. While the rest of the galaxy is busy patting themselves on the back for punishing the bad guys, human scientists are actually working with Zephyrian researchers to figure out what really happened. And let me tell you, what they discovered turned everything upside down. Dr. Beth Taylor arrived on Zephyrian Prime with a team of researchers who had one simple approach. Instead of judging, they wanted to understand. Beth's not your typical academic. She's got dirt on her fingernails, coffee stains on her lab coat, and this habit of asking uncomfortable questions that make politicians squirm. She spent her career studying environmental disasters, from the Great Australian Reef die-off to the Martian Dust Bowl crisis. So she knows what desperation looks like. When Beth and her team started examining the so-called evidence of Zephyrian crimes, they brought something the Galactic Council investigators didn't: actual curiosity. The Council's investigators had come in with their minds already made up, looking for proof to support what they already believed. Beth's team came in asking why, instead of how guilty, take those illegal genetic experiments that had everyone so worked up. The Galactic Council's report made it sound like the Zephyrians were playing mad scientists with dangerous organisms. But when Beth actually looked at the data, really looked at it, not just skimmed through it, she found something completely different. The Zephyrians were working with soil microorganisms. Tiny, invisible creatures that most people never think about, but that keep entire ecosystems alive. Beth discovered that Zephyrian Prime star had started fluctuating about 50 years ago, putting out bursts of radiation that were slowly killing everything in the soil. Without these microorganisms, nothing could grow. The planet was slowly becoming a dead rock. So what did the Zephyrians do? They tried to save them. Those illegal genetic experiments were desperate attempts to make the microorganisms resistant to radiation. They weren't trying to create weapons or superorganisms. They were trying to keep their world alive. It's like someone drowning trying to grab onto anything that floats, Beth explained to her team. They weren't being malicious. They were terrified. Then there was the unauthorized terraforming that had the environmental protection agencies across the galaxy demanding justice. The Council's report painted this as reckless destruction of natural habitats. But Beth's investigation revealed something heartbreaking. The Zephyrians had been building biodomes, not for conquest or expansion, but as lifeboats. Their food sources were dying along with everything else, so they were creating protected environments where they could grow enough food to keep their population alive. These weren't massive industrial projects. They were small, desperate attempts at survival built by people who were watching their children starve. Beth found construction logs, energy consumption records, resource allocation data. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. These were emergency measures by a dying civilization. Not the actions of environmental criminals, but it was the desecrated burial sites that really showed how wrong the galaxy had gotten it. This accusation had religious species across the galaxy calling for severe punishment. Disturbing the dead is considered one of the worst possible crimes by dozens of different cultures. Except that's not what happened. Beth and her team, working with Elder Vex and the few remaining Zephyrian historians, discovered that these weren't burial sites at all. They were sacred groves, living forests that the Zephyrians consider holy, and the Zephyrians hadn't destroyed them. They had been desperately trying to save them. As the radiation from their dying star increased, these ancient forests were withering and dying. The Zephyrians were trying to relocate them, to move the trees to protected areas where they might survive. They were trying to save their most sacred places, not destroy them. Imagine someone accused you of vandalizing a church, Beth explained later, when you were actually trying to carry the altar to safety before the building collapsed. When Beth presented her findings to the Galactic Council, you could feel the mood in the chamber shift. The evidence was overwhelming. Data logs, scientific measurements, witness testimonies from surviving Zephyrians. Everything told the same story. This wasn't a species of criminals. This was a species that had been fighting for survival and had been condemned for it. That's when Ambassador Mills of the Vorthak Empire stood up, his forked tongue flicking out in agitation. His voice carried that arrogant tone that makes you want to throw something at the wall. "Honorable council members," he hissed, "we cannot allow ourselves to be swayed by these emotional appeals. Humanity has proven once again that they are naive idealists who cannot recognize true evil when they see it. These findings are clearly the result of Zephyrian manipulation of human sentiment." The chamber started buzzing with murmurs and discussions. Some species seemed convinced by Mill's argument. Others looked uncertain. It was one of those moments where you could see the decision balanced on a knife's edge. That's when Ambassador Brooks stood up with that cold diplomatic smile that had negotiated humanity through 3 separate trade wars and 2 border disputes. She looked directly at Mills, and her voice cut to the chamber noise like a laser through butter. "Ambassador Mills raises an interesting point about recognizing evil," she said calmly. "Perhaps he could explain why the Vorthak Empire filed mining claims on Zephyrian territories exactly 7 hours after the embargo was approved." The chamber went dead silent. Mill's snake-like face went through several color changes, and you could practically see him trying to figure out how to respond to that. "In fact," Brooks continued, pulling out a data pad, "I have here the complete filing records. Mining rights, territorial claims, resource extraction permits, all filed by Vorthak corporations within days of the embargo. Funny how that works, isn't it?" And just like that, the whole thing unraveled. The breakthrough moment comes when human engineers, working basically around the clock with their Zephyrian counterparts, pull off something that should have been impossible. But let me tell you how they got there, because this is the kind of human stubbornness that changes history. When Dr. Frank Wilson first looked at the data on Zephyrian Prime's dying star, his reaction was pretty much what you'd expect from a guy who'd spent 30 years fixing impossible problems. "Well, that's definitely broken." Frank's the kind of engineer who fixes space stations with duct tape and good intentions, and he's never met a problem he wouldn't at least try to solve. The star was fluctuating like a broken light bulb, putting out these massive bursts of radiation followed by periods where it barely gave off any energy at all. According to every textbook in the galaxy, once a star starts doing that, you got maybe 50 years before it either goes nova or burns out completely. Either way, everything in the system dies. But Frank had this crazy idea. He'd been working on something called solar resonance technology, basically a way to use controlled energy pulses to stabilize stellar fluctuations. It had worked on small-scale tests, tiny experimental stars that you could fit in a laboratory. Nobody had ever tried it on an actual full-size star that was actively trying to kill everyone around it. It's like trying to tune a guitar string the size of a planet while it's trying to electrocute you. Frank explained to his team. His team, by the way, included people like Lisa Park, a fusion specialist who'd spent 5 years working on the Mars terraforming project, and Danny Roberts, a systems engineer who had this weird talent for making completely different technologies work together. The Zephyrian scientists they worked with were initially skeptical, not because they doubted human engineering. At this point, they'd seen humans work miracles with scrap metal and determination, but because they'd tried everything they could think of to save their star, and nothing had worked. Dr. Zeph Callis, the lead Zephyrian stellar physicist, had been working on the star problem for 20 years. His crystalline skin was scarred from radiation exposure, and his internal light flickered weakly from exhaustion. When Frank first explained the solar resonance idea, Zeph Callis listened politely, then pointed out 17 different ways it could fail catastrophically. "Your concerns are all valid," Frank admitted. "But here's the thing. Your star is already failing catastrophically. We can't make it much worse. So they started building. And let me tell you, this wasn't some sleek laboratory project. This was desperate engineering at its finest. They built resonance generators out of salvaged Zephyrian technology and human spare parts. Lisa figured out how to modify Zephyrian crystal matrices to handle the energy loads they needed. Danny somehow managed to get human computers to talk to Zephyrian sensors, creating a control system that looked like it was held together with hope and stubbornness. They worked for months, 18-hour days, sleeping in shifts, living on coffee and whatever passed for coffee in Zephyrian culture. The generators had to be placed at precise points around the star system, which meant sending teams out in ships that were barely holding together to install equipment while being bombarded by radiation. When they finally got everything in place, the moment of truth was terrifying. They had one shot. If the resonance frequencies were wrong, they could make the star go nova immediately, turning the entire system into an expanding ball of death. If the equipment failed, there wouldn't be enough resources to try again. Frank stood in the makeshift control center they'd built on Zephyrian Prime's largest moon, surrounded by humans and Zephyrians who'd bet everything on this working. "Everybody ready?" he asked, his hand hovering over the activation control. Elder Vex, who'd been watching the entire project with quiet hope, nodded slowly. "We trust you," he said simply. Frank hit the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the monitoring equipment started going crazy, showing energy patterns unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The star began pulsing in rhythm with the resonance generators, and slowly, incredibly, the chaotic fluctuations started to smooth out. Picture the moment when news feeds across the galaxy show Zephyrian Prime's sickly orange sun suddenly flaring back to its normal blue-white brilliance. The light that had been weak and unstable for 50 years became strong and steady, sending waves of life-giving energy across the system. Within days, something magical started happening. Green shoots began poking up through what used to be barren soil. The microorganisms that the Zephyrians had desperately tried to save with their illegal genetic experiments began multiplying again. Rivers that had dried up started flowing. The atmosphere itself began to clear as plant life returned. The Zephyrian population, which had dwindled to less than 1 million people scattered across refugee camps and dying stations, started coming home. But more importantly, they started living again instead of just surviving. Elder Vex, his crystalline skin now glowing with its natural inner light for the first time in decades, returned to the Galactic Council. He stood before the same assembly that had condemned his people, but now he looked like the leader he'd always been meant to be. His message was simple, but it cut right to the heart of everything that had happened. The humans taught us something that we will never forget. Sometimes the galaxy is wrong. Sometimes the right choice is the unpopular one. And sometimes the species everyone calls naive and idealistic are the only ones wise enough to see past their own prejudices. The chamber was dead silent as the implications sank in. They'd nearly let an entire civilization die because they were too proud to question their own assumptions. Years later, karma comes knocking, and let me tell you, it arrives with a vengeance that nobody saw coming. The Vordak Empire, those same snake-like beings who have been so eager to condemn the Zephyrians and grab their mining rights, suddenly find themselves facing their own nightmare scenario. It started small, as these things usually do. A few cases of what Vordak doctors thought was just a regular respiratory infection in some of their outer colonies. No big deal, right? The Vordak have always prided themselves on having the most advanced medical technology in the galaxy. They've got automated hospitals that can diagnose and treat 1,000 different diseases before you even finish explaining your symptoms. But this plague was different. It spread through Vordak populations like wildfire, and their fancy medical technology couldn't even figure out what it was, let alone how to stop it. Within months, entire Vordak worlds were under quarantine. Their proud medical institutions were overwhelmed. Their doctors were dying alongside their patients, and their government was starting to panic. What made it worse was the timing. Right around the same time the plague hit, investigative journalists from a dozen different species started uncovering the truth about Vordak business practices. Turns out those mining claims on Zephyrian territory were just the tip of the iceberg. Evidence started piling up like garbage after a festival. war profiteering during the Rim War conflicts, where Vorthack corporations sold weapons to both sides, environmental destruction on mining worlds that made the Zephyrian situation look like a minor paper cut, slave labor operations disguised as economic development programs. The list went on, and each revelation made the galaxy angrier. So when the Vorthack Empire came crawling to Galactic Council, begging for medical aid and research assistance, you can imagine the reception they got. The same council chamber where they had condemned the Zephyrians was now filled with species calling for justice, for sanctions, for making the Vorthack face the consequences of their actions. The Crothry Collective stood up first, their insect-like ambassador clicking his mandibles in righteous anger. The Vorthack Empire has shown no mercy to others. Why should we show mercy to them? The Ethereal Union floated forward, their gas cloud representative swirling with indignant energy. They profited from suffering. Let them face their own suffering alone. One by one, species after species called for isolation, for punishment, for letting the Vorthack reap what they had sown. The chamber's mood-sensing walls were pulsing deep purple with anger and satisfaction. Justice was finally being served. Then the Zephyrians asked to speak. Elder Vex, now fully recovered and glowing with healthy inner light, stood before the council. Everyone expected him to call for revenge, to demand that the Vorthack suffer as his people had suffered. Instead, he did something that shocked everyone in the chamber. The Zephyrian Republic votes to provide aid to the Vorthack Empire, he announced calmly. Not because we have forgotten their lies, but because we remember what it feels like to be abandoned by the galaxy when death comes knocking. That opened the floodgates. Species after species that had received human help during their own dark times began standing up. The Altrian Federation, whose food crisis had been solved by human agricultural specialists. The Nexus Cooperative, whose asteroid mining disaster had been contained by human emergency response teams. The Stellar Nomads, whose refugee ships had been resupplied by human merchants when everyone else turned them away. 12 different species followed the Zephyrian lead, all echoing the same message. Mercy should be given not because it's deserved, but because it's right. But here's what nobody saw coming. Even after all these species had voted to help, when it came time for humanity's turn, every eye in the chamber turned to Ambassador Brooks with a different kind of expectation. This was their moment for payback. The Vorthack had called them naive idealists, had tried to block their aid to the Zephyrians, had questioned their motives at every turn. Brooks stood up slowly, and for a moment, you could see the weight of the decision on her shoulders. She looked directly at Ambassador Mills, who was sitting in the defendant's section this time, his proud, snake-like features now desperate and pleading. The Terran Federation votes to provide aid to the Vorthack Empire, she announced, and the chamber erupted in shocked murmurs and surprised hissing sounds. Mills himself looked stunned, his forked tongue flicking out in confusion and disbelief. Brooks continued, her voice carrying across the chamber with absolute clarity. Not because we've forgotten their lies about us. Not because we've forgiven their attempts to profit from Zephyrian suffering. But because choosing who deserves compassion isn't compassion at all. It's just politics. She paused, letting that sink in, then added something that would be quoted across the galaxy for generations. Compassion that depends on the worthiness of its recipient isn't compassion. It's just another form of judgment. Within days, human medical ships were preparing to depart for Vorthack space. But these weren't just cargo haulers like the ones that had helped the Zephyrians. These were full hospital ships, loaded with experimental treatments, volunteer doctors, and research teams who were ready to risk their lives fighting a plague that could potentially kill them too. Dr. Patricia Green, the lead researcher on the mission, summed it up perfectly when a reporter asked her why she was risking her life for people who had tried to harm humanity's reputation. Because someone has to break the cycle. Someone has to show that you can do the right thing even when the people you're helping wouldn't do the same for you. As those medical ships departed Earth's orbital stations, something finally clicked for the galaxy. They realized that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology, their military might, or their diplomatic skills. It was their stubborn refusal to give up on others, even when those others had given up on themselves long ago.